Hello, girls and boys. Hope everybody had a great weekend. So, just a quick update. Isabel took some of the information she learned from Mr. Lockton during his meeting, and she ran and during the night and gave it to Curzon, who's going to give it to Mr. Bellingham. So she's acting kind of like a spy now, and she thinks that now she's giving him this information, she should be freed. And Curzon said, in time. So she's getting a little impatient. She wants to leave the Lockton's house now. Okay, so we're on to chapter 11. And this is Friday, June 7th, 1776. It felt like Becky shook me awake the moment I fell asleep. "Make haste, girl," she hissed. "You didn't start the fire yet. Why are you still in bed?" Haste? That was the word of the day. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch up. It did not help that Madame was in a mood. "Girl," she said to me as I prepared to sweep the kitchen floor, "the bedding needs to be aired." "Yes, ma'am." And I set the broom back in its place and went upstairs, where I stripped off the bedding, carried it outside, and pegged it to the laundry line. Just as I finished, Madame opened the back door. "Why are you dawdling so?" she yelled. "The floor in here is filthy, and the banister needs to be polished, and I told you to wear your shoes in my house." After I squeezed my feet into those small, dreadful shoes, it was back to the sweeping and then the polishing of the banister with soft rags and beeswax scented with lemon. When I made it halfway up the stairs, Madame yelled at me for airing the bed linen on a day that threatened to rain. At least she did not call for Ruth's company. Becky had set my sister to scrubbing the back steps. Ruth hummed so loudly it put me in mind of a swarm of bees in clover. As I gathered in the sheets, I watched the gate, waiting for the rebels to arrive to arrest the Locktons and reward me with our liberty. We would be given proper cabins on the ship, I was sure of it. No more riding in the hold with barrels of salt cod. Ruth and me would have a cabin fit for ladies, with bunks and blankets and pillows and 3 meals a day. Yes, indeed, that was my future. "Aren't you done yet?" Becky yelled from the back door. "We have to prepare the drawing room." And I shook away my daydreams. The drawing room was on the second floor. It wasn't a room where folks sat with paints and colored chalk to draw pictures, like I had figured it was, since it was called the drawing room. It was another parlor, 3 times the size of the one downstairs. We removed the sheets covering the furniture. A dozen chairs with needleworked seats were scattered around the room, organized around tables with delicate legs. A low settee stood in front of the fireplace, and a mirror framed in mahogany hung above the mantel, flanked by oil lamps fastened to the wall. Kind of sounds like Victoria Mansion. Why this room has to be prepared is beyond me," Becky muttered as we folded the sheets together. "No staff to speak of, the larder half empty, the city getting ready to explode, and she wants this room turned out and polished. Of all the foolishness." A loud beating on the front door interrupted Becky. "Dash it all!" Becky exclaimed as she clattered down the stairs. "Keep folding," she called to me. Not for love nor money, and I peered out a front window. The group of men clustered on the front steps did not look like angels, but they could have been in disguise. 4 of them wore the coats, breeches, powdered wigs, and hats of merchants. One had papers tucked under his arm. 6 soldiers stood behind them, all wearing uniforms but carrying long metal bars instead of guns. Becky opened the door and the men filed inside. I stepped out into the hall and peered down the stairs. The man with the papers under his arm had removed his hat. It was Master Bellingham. My heart sang. A door slammed overhead as Madame flew out of her chamber. "What is the meaning of this?" I pressed myself against the wall so she could rush by me, and then I followed her down the stairs. The soldiers had split into 2 groups. Half went into the front parlor, and the other half into the Locktons' library. Both groups set to removing the windows, prying them out with their casings with the long bars. "What are you doing to my windows?" Madame demanded. Bellingham approached her. No need to fret, ma'am. We are called to make sacrifices. Sacrifices? Master Lockton asked as he hurried in. This is thievery. What right have you to destroy my home? There was a horrific crash in the parlor as the hooks that held up the heavy draperies flew off the wall and landed on the floor. Plaster dust swirled. Bellingham removed the papers under his arm. You surprise me, Elihu, he said. I thought a patriot such as yourself would welcome the chance to contribute to the army. Remember, Elihu is Mr. Lockton's first name. Beads of sweat stood at the edge of Lockton's wig. How does that pertain to the ripping down of my house, James? Bellingham patted Lockton's shoulder. We need your lead, friend, for ammunition. Good people throughout the city are donating all the lead they own. The Provincial Congress will compensate you, of course. In due time, I've invoices prepared. Madam frowned. How is it possible to turn windows into bullets? Well, the counterweights are made of lead, ma'am, Bellingham explained, and your drapery pulls are also made of lead. This is an outrage, Lockton fumed. No, Elihu, Bellingham said, this is war. Even our churches are making the sacrifice, delivering their bells to be recast as cannons. Surely you do not rate your home above the home of God. The soldiers left the library, deposited the lead weights by the front door, and headed up to the second floor, knocking their shoulders against the paintings of the Locktons' ancestors that lined the staircase. I wanted to shout that they should search for the money in the linen chest. Instead, I shrank against the wall to let them pass. They haven't restored the windows to the frames, protested Lockton. Where are they going? Madam asked. There are plenty of carpenters who will assist with your windows, if you don't feel up to the task yourself, Elihu, Bellingham answered. Sir, shouted a soldier upstairs, we have found it. Bellingham dropped his manners and bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. Madam and Lockton followed close on his heels. I trailed behind. The bedchamber was a large room made small by the 4-poster canopy bed that sat as high as a carriage, 2 massive armoires, and a half-dozen men with red faces. Madam had once again set herself on her walnut linen chest, which sat in front of the hearth. Why was it up here, I wondered? Of all the insults, of all the assaults on the dignity of a woman, she said to Bellingham, this, sir, is the lowest, the most base. I shall see to it that every leader in every land knows. Madam, Bellingham said sternly, if you do not take your body from the chest, I shall order those soldiers to remove you. You would not dare, she said. Yes, he would, dear, Lockton said. Please, wife, let these men do their work with no further delay. There's nothing to worry about. Key sentence. He seemed to hide a message beneath those words, for Madam relaxed some and stood with grace. If you insist, husband, she said. Why would she give up so easily? Perhaps you would prefer to go below stairs, Lockton suggested. The girl can heat some wine to calm your nerves. Madam shook her head. No, dear, I shall remain by your side. Bellingham gave the sergeant a quick nod. The man knelt in front of the chest and opened the latch. Deliverance! They'll arrest them both and reward me mightily. We'll leave this horrid place by sunset, thought Isabel. One corner of Lockton's mouth turned up in a sly smile as a blushing soldier removed the shifts and underskirts of Mrs. Lockton. My heart skipped a beat. Why were the dirty linen still in there, I thought. Becky gathered all that washing yesterday. The soldier looked up at Bellingham. That's all, sir. Clear down to the bottom. I wanted to shout. The money is underneath the false bottom, but I pressed my lips together instead. Bellingham knelt and checked for himself, knocking the wooden sides of the chest. Lockton's grin had spread to both sides of his mouth. Would you care to inspect all of our clothing, James? Perhaps you'd send a man to root through the potatoes and parsnips in our cellar. He had hidden the money elsewhere, and that's why he was at ease. Bellingham rose to his feet and stood with his hands behind him. Would he turn on me, accuse me of making a false report, and expose me to the Locktons? No, he searched through his papers until he pulled out one that he handed to Lockton. You are summoned to the New York Provincial Congress for suspicion of aiding the enemy, Elihu. I am placing you under arrest. These soldiers will escort you. He nodded his head. Two soldiers grabbed Lockton by his elbows, and his smile vanished. Wait, Madam said. You can't arrest him. He's done nothing. To the contrary, ma'am, Bellingham snapped. He has put the lives of thousands in jeopardy. The men filed by me without another word. Bellingham kept his face straight ahead, but as he passed by, he cut his eyes at me. They drilled a hole right into my fear of discovery. There was the clatter of boots on the stair treads, and then boots on the marble steps outside, and then the crash of the front door slamming, and they were gone. Madam stared blankly at the empty doorway. Ma'am? I asked quietly. Her eyes turned to me. Then she blinked as if she suddenly realized who I was, and she stood. Don't just stand there, girl. These linens need to be washed. I can't think how Becky missed them. I shall speak to her about the laziness. And then Mrs. Lockton fainted. Wow. I wonder why she fainted. Do you think it was the stress of it all or made her anxious? What do you think? Okay, keep listening. We'll move on to chapter 11 next. Is it 11? Yeah, no, chapter 12.